I have to say it does not quite feel like spring. In terms of temperatures and the foliage, certainly, but the air is really dry here for April in Texas. And looking at the SPC outlook, hardly any storms to be found. A different situation for tomorrow, though. Slight risk for the Dallas area, Oklahoma City, Houston, Austin, Baton Rouge, Shreveport. What's going to happen? Well, let's take a look at the surface map. Just not seeing very much. Large area of high pressure across Arkansas and Tennessee. And if we look out to the west, don't seem to see any Pacific systems. But if we take a look down in Mexico, yep, there's a little funnel system right there. And also this disturbance coming across the northern Baja Peninsula. And there it is on the water vapor imagery. Looks rather benign. This is how it looked last night. Very innocent looking system moving eastward, and you can see that rounding the base of this trough. South of Los Angeles, south of San Diego, a little bit of degraded satellite data, but it emerges out in this area right here. And frankly, back in the old days, the 80s, the 90s, I think this might have resulted in a busted forecast for Texas tomorrow. So let's see what's going to happen with that wave. We can see that moving into Mexico tonight, into the El Paso area tomorrow morning, and then out into the plains during the day tomorrow. And then I'll continue moving eastward. So what's the effect that's going to have? So I think a great way to see how things evolve is to look at the dew point plot. I've switched over to the ARW, WRF ARW, and what we see is starting out this morning, we've got those 50s making it up into the Del Rio area, 60s lurking down in the Corpus Christi area, and of course as the day goes on, we get the advection of moisture northward overnight. So we're bringing in lots of 60s up to the Dallas area and even the Red River. So by 10 a.m., the dry line is starting to get set up out there around San Angelo down to Del Rio, and it gradually moves eastward. And as we get that cap removal, storms start firing. The ARW is looking at more for the Fort Worth area, but the GFS was favoring a cluster a little bit further south in the Austin area. I'm kind of curious if that is actually going to come together or not. Anyway, what we see here is the dry line advancing to Interstate 35 and a cold pool developing. We get some clusters and linear storm development around Interstate 20, Tyler, Corsicana, up towards Sulphur Springs. And you can see everything move very quickly into Louisiana during the overnight hours. So it looks to be pretty stormy in this region here, according to the ARW. Don't see any development further west from this model. The model is just not very aggressive with convective development, so eventually we just erode the moisture out, and the main cold front surges south. Now, I will tell you that the models are not in good agreement about the mesoscale details. Very little surprise because we're 36 hours out. The other factor is that the wave and some of the moisture fields and all that, they're way down in Mexico where data is limited. So the WRF ARW, this is the evolution tomorrow, focusing mostly on the Fort Worth area and then out towards maybe Tyler and Texarkana and Shreveport later. The WRF Nissel looking like this, a little bit further south, more towards the Temple-Waco area and across Palestine, Longview, Jacksonville, and out towards Shreveport, where that's an agreement about an MCS through that region. And it does look like the MCS moves very quickly, so I think it's going to be rooted in the mid-levels to a certain extent. This is the NAM 3 kilometer. Looks more like weaker clusters, but a little bit more southward extent. And it also develops some convection, forced convection, along the cold front that's coming south. An outlier is the HRW NMMB, which is not one of the better models, but it's got a lot of warm air advection precip. And then we get clusters developing, and you can see it goes mostly for this stuff down near Huntsville, Lufkin, and nothing in between, and then some forced convection along the front. So, yeah, that's definitely an outlier. And if that verifies, we'll have to circle around back to that to see what happened. This I did find interesting, the GFS, not really much of a surprise there. This is not really a convection allowing model, so it's not going to get the details down very well. However, looking at the dew point, I did find this a little interesting. This little meso-high developing west of Round Rock in Austin. Very subtle feature, but it makes me wonder if maybe the GFS is looking a little bit further south towards the Austin area, and that would imply maybe a more southern extent for tomorrow. Anyway, that's enough of looking under the microscope for tomorrow. We'll take a closer look at this for tomorrow's edition. So looking at our surface analysis, it is a pretty quiet day across much of the country. We do have that return flow setting up, a very dry, cool return flow in West Texas, 50s, dew points in the 30s, but it is gusty, up to 43 knots out there at Springfield, Colorado. In the Northeast, it's still winter. You can see that going on up there. Snow in Albany. Looks like snow also at the Burlington, Vermont area, and that's in the wake of the departure of that old occlusion, which is now over the Canadian Maritimes, and there it is. Out over Canada, another front making its way through the prairies, temperatures back down into the 20s with snow there north of Saskatoon, and that's being driven by this 1032 millibar high across Alaska and Yukon, and that's just a big chunk of cool air that is kind of like the last gasp of winter making its way southward. We have had a warm-up in the Canadian high Arctic. Still not seeing any sub-zero weather up there. It is cool. Yeah, there's a -1 right there, but that's kind of an outlier there. So things are slowly warming up, and I think we shall see May finally on the horizon here pretty soon. Also a cool evening out there in Europe. We've got that chunk of cold air coming down from the North Sea, from Iceland, and dropping temperatures into the 40s. However, it's not a particularly severe cold air mass. We can see temperatures returning to the 50s and even a few 60s there in Ireland. Good weather in the southwestern U.S. this afternoon. It is a little bit on the mild side, but some evidence of some upper-level cold temperatures. A lot of cumulus developing there across the Rockies and the Four Corners region. And we can see the marine layer making an appearance all the way back towards Riverside, Ontario, putting much of the LA Basin and San Diego under a cool layer of stratus. And some of that marine layer is also making its way into the San Francisco area and much of the coast. And we're going to see more of that as we head into summer, because to a certain extent that's driven by strong surface heating inland, and we get the very high pressures in the oceanic regions, and that gives us a gradient that works kind of like that. So this is the start of stratus, marine layer type air making its way into the valleys. Down to the south, there's the evidence of that system moving towards Texas for tomorrow. That's the baroclinic cirrus there. And further south, we can see some cirrus associated with the southern branch of the polar front jet, maybe kind of bound up with the subtropical jet. And there's those temperatures and winds, and you can see the prevailing northerly gradient through Nevada, California. So that's taken a toll on the warmth of the air mass. Not seeing much above 81 degrees. So it is on the cool side. The south central U.S., lots of stratus and stratocumulus with the moisture riding up over that cold dome. We still have high pressure at the surface, but a lot of this cloud material is up at 850 and maybe as high as 700 millibars. The low ceilings indicating the surge of moisture. That's going to be marginal VFR there with some IFR in the Del Rio area right there. And that is the moisture making its way northward. Don't see the dry line here. It's a little bit too dry and cool for that, but it looks like it may be trying to start in this area maybe tomorrow. This is a satellite picture we associate with dry, mild conditions, and that's what we have there in the southeastern U.S. And there it is, cool, dry conditions, 20s dew points all the way down to Florida. And even down in Miami, a little bit on the mild side. Usually we see about 87 to 88, and we've only got about 83 at this time. The Northeast being hammered by the cold. Cold air advection stratocumulus, northwesterly flow, and this is a story we've seen probably 80 to 90% of the days over the past 6 months. It's just been one after the other cold air going through that area. And there's the proof, 20s and 30s. I'm seeing 20s up there near Caribou. And let's see, Toronto 41, 49 at JFK Airport, New York, and 45 at Pittsburgh. And the snow coming down in Vermont and New Hampshire. The north central U.S. in between systems. They've got that cold air outbreak coming in from Saskatchewan and Alberta. That's not quite made it all the way down. So kind of a nice day in that region. And there you can see it on the plots. Lots of 60s, all the way up to 65 there at Minot, and 60s all the way up into Manitoba also. But it is quite dry, and it is gusty with lots of 30-knot gusts throughout the Dakotas. And there's the front on its way into eastern Montana. And likewise, a nice day in the Pacific Northwest, except for western Montana. That's probably a little bit of upslope flow as the flow kind of recurves back towards the southwest. A little bit of cold temperatures aloft, helping to produce some instability. And there's the plots in that region. Cold front's going to be sitting about like that right there. It's kind of a shallow air mass, not much progress to the west. So you get into Idaho, into eastern Washington, we've got those 60s and almost 70 there at Yakima. Some of that cold air is filtering through the valleys of British Columbia, the Fraser River Valley, for example, and they've got gusty north winds and much cooler conditions, so I think we can certainly find a front right through there and leaking back into that Montana system. So yeah, there's a convergence of the wind field and some lower pressures, so I'm not sure if I captured that on the surface map, but I think that would be a baroclinic wave right in that region. And I think that'll do it for this edition of Forecast Lab. I'll try to get out an early video tomorrow covering the pending thunderstorm outbreak. Anyway, I hope you all have a great Thursday, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.